Hey, it's Guy Raz here, and welcome to The Great Creators. This is where I have conversations with some of the most inspiring performers, actors, and musicians of our time. And today on the show, actor, director, and producer Ron Howard, the man behind films such as Apollo 13, Cocoon, Da Vinci Code, Frost Nixon, and of course, A Beautiful Mind. Ron has won 2 Academy Awards, and he's also a member of another exclusive club. He's a former child star who avoided getting burned out, and he turned out really grounded and actually really normal, which is where we began our conversation.
Well, the normalcy was something that just came really from our family. I think our parents were in the business, but they weren't sort of climbers. They weren't hustlers in that way. They just worked and made a living at it. And everybody liked them and respected them, especially my father. And I think that gave us a kind of a shield in a way. Because he was a freelance actor and writer, it meant that he had a lot of control over his schedule and his time. And he was, a good year, he might only be filming 20 or 30 days out of the year. And could be a pretty good year. Otherwise, he was writing, which he had control over. And so he went to the set with us. And I remember early on, him intervening, like when the crew members or people were, getting a little too off color with their jokes or teasing me in a certain way that was almost provoking me to be a wise ass or something, and I remember him intervening and saying, he's 8 years old. He's here working alongside you guys, but he's 8 years old, and and please keep that in mind, and things like that. And he wasn't tough or intimidating, but he was a strong guy and logical, and people just respected him, as they did when he would be, on the set with Clint. But still, and Clint went through more struggles than I did. Some of that was generational, kind of the time in which he went through adolescence and what was going on in the country. And some of it was his relationship with the business, which was different than mine. And so, our parents did great. They couldn't shield us entirely. So there's an element of luck in all this too. Yeah. I keep thinking, Guy, that the people that I grew up with on the Andy Griffith Show, and this sounds kind of corny, but they were great people. I was exposed to a really healthy working environment. Now, they weren't perfect. They were human, but I try to emulate the sort of creative energy around the Andy Griffith Show when I'm directing today.
It's interesting because, you mentioned that show, and of course, Don Knotts and Jim Nabors and Andy Griffith, they're very, and at the time, God, everybody in the United States watched that show. As a kid, as a little boy, you were so famous, you were so recognizable, and I wonder how. Obviously, the culture of celebrity is so different today than it was in the 50s and 60s, but I wonder how you explain to yourself. You mentioned a lot of what you talk about in your book is about your parents and your dad especially. And, the way you frame his relationship with you and also his, the way he kind of protected you is really remarkable because you could look at it in sort of from a variety of different perspectives. You could say, well, he was just a stage dad. But he wasn't really like pushing you, right? He was there to sort of guide you.
Yeah. He, when he saw that I had an aptitude and then later that Clint did, after a kind of a series of fluky circumstances, but he first recognized it because he was directing theater and he saw me as a 3-year-old sort of mimicking the actors and picking up on dialogue. And so that, I'm sure that tickled him. In fact, we had a scene from Mr. Roberts, which was a show that he had performed in with Henry Fonda and then was directing. And we had a scene that we did. If you ever saw the movie, it was sort of between the Henry Fonda character and the Jack Lemmon character. And I was the Jack Lemmon character, Ensign Pulver. Anyway, this led to me finally being, cast in a movie. And they never thought that was going to be a long-term thing. But once it did, and I did have an aptitude toward it, my dad's attitude about it was that, well, this could be a learning experience, whether it ever meant that I would actually stay in the business or not. It's a unique opportunity They weren't making very much money. It was a chance for me to have a college fund, and then later Clint. But moreover, he sensed, because he had worked a lot as a kid. You know, I mean, he had been working on the farm since he was 5, really doing chores. It was an expectation that those chores would be done and a task would be fulfilled. So he believed that kids could actually grow from this, and if carefully supervised. And that's a big if. So that's where the good luck comes into play. But also he just kind of had I call it sort of Midwestern Zen, you know. But his philosophy was very much grounded in a kind of a common sense that served him well throughout his 89 years, and I think it rubbed off on us.
I mean, when you were already from an early age being exposed to fame and also the way people treated you, you know, kids wanting your autograph and fans screaming your name, and how do you? I mean, this lasted for a long time, and you were, you know, very famous from such an early age. How do you explain to yourself the fact that it didn't penetrate? It didn't affect your personality. I mean, because in so many cases it would have that impact. Just being
It did, Guy. But I always recognized it as an element of this way of life, as an aspect. I didn't. It wasn't the reason to do the work, but it was something that came along with the work. And I not always comfortable, not always pleasant, sometimes really unpleasant and really uncomfortable. But it was a reality, and for me, the trade-off was sort of a no-brainer. I mean, because I just always liked being around it. I think it is one of the reasons I wanted to become a director, though. I think from a fairly early age, the idea of sort of not being front and center appealed to me. Not being, a celebrity and famous and recognizable in that way, and particularly with when Happy Days came along, because I'd been known as a kid on the Andy Griffith Show, and I was recognizable and all of those things. But with Happy Days, it was almost like we were in a boy band. It was the fan base was different and really avid. And it really was kind of like you can't go to Disneyland anymore. You know, you can't go Christmas shopping and things like that. Whereas I never had really had that on the Andy Griffith Show. So it nudged me even further to sort of say, I wonder what it would be like behind the camera, not having to wear makeup. So it's, I think it fueled that in some ways.
You didn't enjoy it. You didn't sort of like that part of the.
I disliked it. I mean, now I actually appreciate it far more than I did as a kid, because I don't feel freakish now. I feel like there's a kind of recognition of a life's work, because so much of it is now focused on deep nostalgia or things that I've been directing that I really do feel more responsibility for. So if somebody compliments a movie that I've directed, then that's more directly flattering. When you're being complimented for acting, it's a little different, because in your heart of hearts, you're playing a character. You were lucky to get the part. Somebody else has written it, and so you're the face of that character on that show or in that movie. But in your heart of hearts, you kind of know it's not really you. But so when I get when I'm complimented about something that I've directed, well, that's handmade stuff, and I find that more flattering.
Already at a young age, like 10, 11, 12, somebody on the set of Andy Griffith, I think, said to you, you've got the sensibility of a director, though I can see the way that you're looking at how everything is done here.
It was Howard Morris. Howard Morris played a character on our show called Ernest T. Bass, who was a crazy guy from the country who came down and threw bricks through windows, created total anarchy, but he was kind of in his own lovable, funny way. It was okay. Andy could handle him. But Howard, in fact, had been, very famous key member in your show of shows, the Sid Caesar classic sketch comedy show preceding Saturday Night Live and other shows like it. And he was a very sophisticated guy, and he wound up directing a number of episodes. I think he might have even won an Emmy or been nominated for an Emmy for directing an Andy Griffith Show episode. And he was the one. I remember one day he said, "I see the way you watch the camera and you watch the rehearsals even when you're not in the scene. And, I have a feeling you're going to wind up being a director someday." And then it was, "Okay, go ahead and hit your mark. Come on, we got to do the scene." But it stuck with me. And I'd watched my dad direct a lot of theater. And a lot of the directors on the Andy Griffith Show had been actors. But it's really when I was like 12, 13, it was this kind of golden era of a Hollywood Renaissance period with, Zeph Farrelly's Romeo and Juliet, or Bonnie and Clyde, or, In the Heat of the Night, and just so many great films, great action movies like Dirty Dozen. And I fell in love with movies as a fan, and recognized that directing for the big screen was quite different than directing episodes of TV shows, because this was really about transporting people in a way, using cinema. And I would then go back and talk to these directors from the show, and they would say, "Yeah, it's a huge difference." And they'd begin to explain why. So when I would watch Mike Nichols' The Graduate, I wasn't just watching a funny, edgy, sexy movie. I was beginning to recognize what the camera work was all about, and how the music was being used, and I began to see things on a different level, and really fell in love with the medium. And that's when the idea of becoming the director really, really took hold.
Yeah, I mean, from the age of 4, you had this very successful acting career. Obviously, 2 huge hit shows, Andy Griffith, and then later Happy Days. But you were on you were on like an episode of MASH. I mean, you were on everything. You were on so many shows. You
Big
could
Valley.
have had, right? I mean, I think you even the last few years ago, you were on a couple episodes of This Is Us. You could have you could have continued to be an actor to this day. I could have been talking to the actor Ron Howard, but really early in your life, like by the time you were 20, you knew that isn't what you wanted to do, which is kind of remarkable. What was it about wanting to be a director that you thought you were not able to achieve as an actor? Obviously there are different roles, but what was it that you?
Well, and it even started earlier than 20. I mean, it really did clicked in a big way around 14, 15. And when I started making a lot of Super 8 movies and editing, I fell in love with editing, and writing more. But it was wanting the leadership role, and I enjoyed acting, and I thought I was pretty good in a limited sort of way, but I wasn't in love with myself as a performer. I didn't see myself and think, "Wow, sky's the limit." As I got a little older and began to see other performances and other movies, and just see the way I was being cast and typecast, I just felt like there were limitations there. But there didn't have to be any limitations as a director. I didn't have to do, just what I was castable for. I could do other kinds of movies that I might not ever be around. And I love the medium. So I might not ever be right for, a thriller or a true life adventure story. But I could make them if I could learn how.
So essentially, you felt like your versatility as an actor was limited, but as a director, it was limitless.
Correct. And I already admired people like Billy Wilder, and Howard Hawks, and these directors who did a lot of different kinds of movies. There were Frank Capra and John Ford. They were great, but they kind of stayed in a lane. Hitchcock sort of stayed in a lane. I admired the versatility of especially Wilder and Hawks, and William Wyler as well. But it took me a while to figure out who William Wyler was, because he had such a thick accent. He didn't do very many interviews.
I've heard you say that you didn't really begin to feel fully creative until you moved from acting to directing.
Yeah, because as an actor, I never took real responsibility for a scene. I mean,
Yeah.
I tried to bring something to the role, but I was really a good soldier. Now, in subsequent years, I've worked with artists, and they don't take over and try to direct, but they contribute in a way that I never could as an actor. I mean, what Russell Crowe can bring to a scene, or Kate Blanchett can bring to a scene, or Tom Hanks or Amy Adams or Glenn Close. These people really are artists using their function at a next level that I never felt I could do, or what didn't even recognize. I think actors can, in fact, have a huge impact on projects in these intangible ways that just add up. But that's not something that I understood. I understood showing up, being honest, understanding the comedy timing if that's what was required. If not, figuring out how to get at a truthful emotion. And I did a good job. I did a good job for what I was cast in. But I didn't view it as art.
I've seen a big chunk of the first film you directed, Grand Theft Auto, which, by the way, is available on YouTube for free. So I don't know if you want, if that's
okay
a good thing
me.
or a bad thing. But it's because you star in it, but you also directed it. And I wonder. I mean, I think many people might have the perception of, oh, well, you were a child actor and you had success as sort of a young man and as an actor. And so the transition to directing was easy, it's a no-brainer. But actually, I think it was the reverse of that in fact, because you were seen as Opie or Richie Cunningham, it was harder for you to become a director initially.
Well, I directed Grand Theft Auto. I started filming the day after my 23rd birthday. So I was young. And in that era, outside of Spielberg and a couple of people, that idea of being a sort of wonderkind, that didn't happen really.
Yeah.
So you put on top of that, the sort of graduating from sitcoms, and it just seemed unlikely to people that my sensibilities, and vision would be cinematic, would actually offer that. And so I always felt like people were fairly patronizing when they talked to me about directing. A couple of people weren't. Henry Fonda was one of them. I did a failed television series in between the Andy Griffith Show and Happy Days. And Henry Fonda, it was just a money job for him. It was called The Smith Family. He was doing it in and around plays and movies. And but because my dad had toured with him, he enjoyed talking to me. And so he was quiet with most people, not rude in any way, but just a little, a little distant. But I could ask him questions about working with John Ford or other films that he had done. And by then I was beginning to really, be a film lover. And I also showed him scripts that I'd read and written rather, and some short films that I'd made. And he really took an interest. And he, even though I was like 16, 17 at the time, he said, if you love movies the way you seem to love them, you should become a director, because movies it's not an actor's medium. The theater is for actors and writers. The directors help, but then they have to step away and hand it over. If you love movies, be a director. So he was very, very encouraging. When I acted in American Graffiti, George Lucas was very encouraging. And so I did have a few people early on that sort of said, "You're not kidding yourself. Go for it." But it was a rare thing, and particularly to come from a sitcom background into making movies. And I wouldn't say that if you did go on YouTube and looked at Grand Theft Auto, I'm not sure that you'd sort of say, "There's an Oscar in that guy's future."
It's remarkable because your body of work speaks for itself. And I saw in an interview, your daughter Bryce says, my dad, he wasn't one of the cool kids. He just really focused on great storytelling. And I wonder how you certainly at the beginning of your career, before Splash, before Cocoon, when you were trying to convince people that you could do it, how did you deal with people who were skeptical or who saw you as a child actor or teen actor?
Just moved on and, worked on a short film or wrote a script or something.
Did it get you down ever, or?
Frustrated, but in that way that, young men are frustrated most of the time about something, aren't they? I was, I wanted to direct a movie when I was, before I was, out of my teens. That had been my dream. So I was a little bit behind schedule when I finally got to do Grand Theft Auto, which was not exactly my dream project, but the late, great Roger Corman, he was really rare in that at a time when there were only 3 networks and 6 studios, and that was really it. The idea of indie filmmaking was such an uphill battle. John Cassavetes, a couple of people bullied their way into it, kind of, because they had leverage. But for most part, that didn't exist. Then there was the low budget AIP and a couple of companies that Roger sort of emulated that made movies for the drive-ins, B movies and things like that. But he developed this eye for talent, and he learned how to create enough of a framework and an infrastructure that he would give people these opportunities. And then he would encourage us, and I'm talking, when I say us, I'm including myself with Peter Bogdanovich and Martin Scorsese, and right after me, Jim Cameron, or, Jonathan Demme, and people like this, and many more, Joe Dante. But he had an eye for talent in front of and behind the camera, and a willingness to trust. And because he was a director, he went further. He said, you can use genre filmmaking, you can use popular genre filmmaking as a way to still express yourself. So if it's a car crash comedy like Grand Theft Auto, make sure there's plenty of laughs and plenty of cars that crash. If it's another genre, make sure it's horrifying or sexy or whatever it's supposed to be, But look for those opportunities to put your personality into it. And he was very open about encouraging that. And then so he, in front of and behind the camera, trusted people and took chances on them. When I worked on I had to act and eat my dust in order to leverage my way into getting to direct Grand Theft Auto. So it was a humble beginning, but an important one for me. But in that time, over those couple of years that I was around Roger and New World Pictures, there were far, far more women in positions of authority, for example, than I'd ever seen at a studio at that point, because he recognized there were these talented women who were interested in the medium, who doors were being slammed in their face, and they were brilliant and hardworking, and he took advantage of that. But he also gave opportunities.
We've had 2 of your longtime collaborators on the show as guests in the past, Tom Hanks and Brian Grazer. And I want to ask you about Brian. I know you've been asked, a lot of people have asked about this relationship, because Brian says it's the longest partnership in Hollywood. I mean, it's possible that may be the case, that you started Imagine Entertainment in 1986, and the track record of that company is incredible.
And we actually, of course, started working together in sort of late 79, 80 on Night Shift, which was Brian's idea, and Splash, which are 2 movies that predated Imagine.
Yeah.
But we were really working as partners at that point.
And it's worth hearing that episode of our show, because he tells his side of how that came about. But I mean, it really was, it kind of was just a shot in the dark. Like it could have, been.
Oh, yeah, sure. And it evolved, organically. But, at that time I was still on Happy Days. So I was still under contract. And yet I had been directing. I'd done the movie for Roger, which was successful and well regarded.
And you directed
enough.
episodes of Happy Days, too.
No, I didn't direct any episodes. No, I avoided that because we had a great director, Jerry Paris, and I wanted him to do every episode he could do. I thought the show deserved that. But I did get to direct television movies. And there was speaking of women in power, one of the only females in a decision-making role in the business at that time was a really interesting woman named Deanne Barkley. She was in charge of television movies at NBC. And she believed in actors transitioning to directing. And she gave Beau Bridges chances to direct, Michael Landon. And when she saw Grand Theft Auto, she said, well, you can really direct. Why don't you come over to NBC and direct? Now, that was in competition with ABC. But she let me produce and direct TV movies without a commitment or a contract, without having to be in them. She encouraged me. In over 3 different hiatuses, I made and produced a television movie for Deanne and NBC. And I learned so much from that. But still, the studios were not knocking on my door. And if they were, it would be something like a really lame third iteration of like a pot dealer comedy, or something dumb, like a ripoff of Up in Smoke or something really funny and good. And I wasn't going to really do that, and I knew I wouldn't make any real inroads doing a copycat kind of a movie. And but Brian had ideas, and the remarkable thing was, in the way that my agents were unable to, Brian was able to get me into meetings about these projects that really had potential. And when I finally left Happy Days, that's when Night Shift happened. So I think in reality, they were never going to let somebody who was under contract 8 months out of the year direct a feature film, because a feature takes a year. And even though I knew I could figure it out and do it, they didn't. So in retrospect, I kind of understand the reticence. But it was with Brian that we got these 2 challenging movies made. And we've always been very different. It's a kind of an odd couple relationship, but we've connected in ways that are so important. We're friends. There's trust, and he's, got a great skill set and taste and talent, and I do something quite different. And so it's always been a little more of an alliance than a side by side partnership. So it's not like 2 directors directing the movie together. It's really 2 people who, love the business, want to do more. We each had companies ourselves separately, so we kind of merged those, and that yielded a lot of development. And so we were entrepreneurial and sort of driven by different things, but we had so much in common that it's just worked over and over.
What was the sort of the turning point for you where you felt like, okay, now, the doors are open? Was it Splash, or was it Cocoon, or was it Night Shift, or?
It really started with Night Shift. Even though it wasn't a massive hit, it was incredibly well regarded. And suddenly I was having a different kind of meeting around projects. I had a movie that I was desperate to get off the ground as an independent, and almost did, called Rainbow Warrior, about Greenpeace and this one event. And that would have been my first true story to tackle. I never could get that going, but Brian had long gestated Splash. The script had sort of faltered, but he eventually got Ganz and Mendel, who wrote Night Shift, to do a big rewrite on it, and they did a great job. And ultimately, we got that movie made. And that was very uphill for a lot of reasons. There was a competing project that was supposed to star Warren Beatty and Jessica Lange, directed by Herbert Ross, produced by Ray Stark, who was the biggest producer in the business at that point. And yet we were the little engine that could, and we got our movie made, and that really cemented the relationship. And that was a Oscar-nominated movie. It was a top 10 movie. It was a complete underdog smash. And so
Michael Keaton, early Michael Keaton.
Well, that was Night Shift, and Splash was early Tom Hanks. And so, we suddenly now were looked at as people who had our fingers on the pulse of the movie-going public at that time. And before Imagine was formed, I did Cocoon, and Gung Ho, both were successes. Cocoon especially. Brian did Spies Like Us, and several, several hit movies. So when we decided to finally merge, it we had a strong foothold in the business at that point, even though we were quite young.
There are too many. I mean, you've made too many films to talk about all of them in depth, but some of your greatest films are based on true stories. Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind and Frost Nixon, which is one of my favorites. It's such a great film.
Thank you.
Tell me, sort of walk me through the process of, and you've done, I should mention, you did a master class on this, so I'm not asking it back in, it came out a couple years ago, so it's still available, but walk me through the process of how you choose a story, because you must consider hundreds, if not thousands, of ideas.
A lot. I don't know the number, but it's not thousands certainly, and it might be 75 or 100 in any one year. But I'm looking for it. There's sort of a triangulation of a story that I believe audiences might take to for whatever reason, because it's entertaining or informative or both, or a set of characters in a world that I'm interested in exploring, and that I feel like I either have enough curiosity about or good instincts around that I can offer something fresh and interesting. And then the third thing is do I want to work on this for 18 months or 2 years? Is it exciting enough to hold my attention? Well, there's a fourth, which is, will anyone pay for it? But will somebody make it? But generally, between Brian and I at Imagine, anything that either of us really, really grow passionate about, we get made. We get it made, yeah. And by hook or by crook, and it's it's as Brian's always said, it's really a function of energy. I can't think of too many movies that we literally couldn't get off the ground.
I've seen you talk about the ambition of creativity, and I love that idea that you, you have this whole body of work behind you, but to me it suggests this idea that you're constantly looking to push boundaries. Like I imagine you think that your best work is still ahead of you, and that really does drive you to kind of push your own boundaries.
Yeah. Well, I do think that, and it's the great thing about this business is that you just never know. You just never know, how elements might align with with critics' taste, popular taste, and so forth, to yield something that just the alchemy of it just leads to something really memorable. And so talent is a factor in that. Experience helps. But there's just an element of discovery and chance that makes it a kind of a high wire act, but one worthy of walking for me, and it continues to be. But I just really love it. When I say creatively ambitious, I guess what I mean by that is that especially having grown up on television, where certain projects can become products, and it's about then executing a thing that's marketable and so forth. It still requires a tremendous amount of creativity, but you're kind of second guessing and hoping, and the only time I've ever done that was really with the Da Vinci Code series. By the third movie, it was more about, is this the way, a Robert Langdon mystery is supposed to unfold? I don't want anyone else to do it, so I'm going to do it. And, and I was still we all worked hard on it and tried to make, the second and third of those movies really, special and great. And, and a lot of people liked them. But that's not being creatively ambitious. That's not taking a risk. Back to Henry Fonda, who advised me that if I loved movies, I should become a director. He also talked about doing theater as an actor. And And he said, even if you have an established career in this business, if you don't feel like you're taking a real risk every 18 months or 2 years, you're not trying hard enough. He kind of implied you're not respecting the medium or the audience. And so you never want to get into that situation where the cliche is, I phoned it in. Well, I would never want to feel that as a director I was phoning something in.
Help me understand how you think about your role as a leader. I mean, you've worked with, Henry Fonda and Betty Davis and Shirley Jones and Robert De Niro, Tom Hanks. And Russell. Endless. Just you've worked with so many people, and I've read that you really, as a director, you really want input from people. You want people to say, hey, what about this idea? What about that idea? It seems like that would be a no-brainer, but a lot of people actually don't like to operate that way because it can be disruptive.
Well, it can be a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Because if you position yourself as a kind of a editor-in-chief, where you are, you're willing to take a lot of input, and you then have to become this filter.
Yeah.
And that could be kind of stressful, but because it could be a lot of noise. Once you turn that faucet on, it's on, and then people are upset if you turn it off. But what I found over the years is true is that you don't have to turn the faucet off to still make a decision that people will respect, even if it differs from what they want or what they're pitching. And I have actually found that the opposite is true, that if you have a running dialogue with your key, collaborators on a project, that in fact, and they know that you welcome the opportunity to say yes, you're very receptive, but they also respect the fact that you are living with the project and you have this overview. And when you say no, they 9 times out of 10, they say, okay, great. And got it. What do you want me to do? So I've actually found that it's both stimulating to me, benefits the movie, but also brings out the best in people because they know they feel liberated. And the other thing is, when you do say yes to an idea, I call it the 6 of 1 rule. If it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another. If you understand the objectives of a scene or moment in a movie or TV show, and somebody suggests a way to achieve that's different from exactly what was scripted or what was in your mind as the director, but it achieves the goal, I like to use that person's idea, whether they're in front of the camera or behind the camera, because there's an X factor there. Then they own this idea. They understand it organically, intrinsically, not because the director said, this is what you need to do. Please do it this way and stand over here by the window, or let's have the dolly go right to left, not, instead of pushing in, because I always saw it that way. They'll do what the director asks, but they won't own it. Not that they'll sandbag it or begrudge it. No, they'll try, but they're doing what somebody else wants, not what they innately understand. And I think it's really exciting when people are working with something that they really get. And I kind of, to me, it energizes everything, and they feel so involved, and I feel stimulated by it as well. But I come to work with a plan, and for the most part, we do the plan. But everyone knows that I'm very much looking forward to a better idea.
Do you ever get angry?
Oh, I get frustrated, but I don't get angry at people unless they're really bumbling. I mean, once in a while, it's so rare because I get to hire such dedicated people, and they and work on interesting projects where everyone wants to live up to the promise of the project. So I don't get very many people falling down on the job. But if they really disrespect the time, the resources, other people, I can get angry about that. I don't have much of a outward temper. It's pretty rare that people see me really, boiling. But I get disappointed, not in people as much as the circumstances. The logistics didn't allow for it. Or I get mad at myself, like I didn't foresee something. Now that really pisses me off, and I don't think people know when I'm angry with myself, but I feel it.
You've got, you're working on many different projects at the same time. I mean, you've got a documentary on Jim Henson coming out, and very shortly, and also a huge film that you, I believe, finished shooting in Australia called Eden.
Correct.
Before we dive into some of those projects, tell me how you manage multiple things at the same time.
Well, I'm really loving working on the documentaries. If I hadn't stayed with this, I think I would have either been a basketball coach, an English teacher kind of combo, maybe a history teacher, or I might have been a journalist. I loved being on the paper in school, and I was pretty good at it. So the docs really satisfy my curiosity in a way that the scripted projects based on real events do as well. But the relationship with the audience is different when you're making a documentary. They're watching because they're curious about the subject, and part of the promise is you're going to feed them as much information and insight as you possibly can. Whereas in a scripted piece based on real events, it really is about the drama, the emotional connection, the feelings that you can generate, the world that you can create, and of course there's an understanding that you're also offering up some information, but it's sort of like the third or fourth value. Yeah. Whereas in a doc, it's so much about, what can you tell me about this? I'm listening. And so that's a different thing. I enjoy moving back and forth between the two because they're totally different logistical exercises. The timetables are different. It takes much longer to make a documentary. You nurse it along. It's really a team sport. You've got your editorial team working, and the filmmaking or TV producing is so dynamic. It's so much about the logistics and timetables and getting things done and capturing a moment. So two different demands, but creatively one sort of informs the other. And I feel like that working on the docs is actually making me a better director on the scripted side.
So right now, as we speak, how many projects do you have going on concurrently?
Well, right now, I'm releasing. We're releasing the Jim Henson Idea Man documentary. That's finished. Even though I still have a job of helping try to get eyeballs on it.
Yep.
I'm in sort of 2/3 of the way through post-production on Eden. That's the film that I did in Australia. I'm developing 4 different screenplays with writers.
Wow.
Maybe 5. A couple based on books, a couple of original ideas, a couple of true stories, I guess maybe 6 that are really front burner. Also, a television pilot that I'm really excited about based on a novel. And while I can't say what it is, I already am researching and a part of the team getting ready to do our first interviews on my next documentary. So plus there's the Imagine business. We have movies that are getting ready to shoot, and I read those scripts and contribute. I don't have like direct leadership role on those projects, but we've got 2 other things, movies that are lined up that I'm aware of and contributing to when I can, and other things. So but I say this and it makes it sound like I'm fragmented and fractured. Not really, because everyone knows that when I'm directing, I'm in the editing room, I'm on the stage, I'm shooting, that I don't mind hearing about something else and maybe throwing in a quick response, but they know that the directing takes over whenever it's front and center.
I'm curious about going back to this idea of creativity and pushing the boundaries of what you can do in film. Like, probably, Willow, of course, a lot of really complex things, backdraft. And then, of course, Apollo 13, like the complexity of that film at the time, 1995, when you made it. I think you guys filmed some of it in airplanes with zero gravity, and you went through like flight training, or some of you were casted, right? Tell me about how like right now you've got this film Eden, which will come out in 2025, I think, and it takes place in the Galapagos. But tell me how you are pushing the boundaries of what you can do even now.
Well, very character driven. It's a true crime thriller. It's for me a departure. Great performance opportunities for a great cast. Ana de Armas, Sydney Sweeney, Vanessa Kirby, Jude Law, and Daniel Bruhl are the leads, and they've just got great parts. And it was a joy, because that's my very favorite thing to do, is to direct world-class actors in challenging, interesting scenes. So I had a lot of that with Eden, but it takes place in the Galapagos. It's again it's very tense, it's very suspenseful, but one of the factors is just the sort of brutality and ruggedness of the environment that they're living in, and that was the Galapagos 90 years ago on an island called Floriana, and we couldn't bring actors there and shoot. It's basically a game reserve in a park, but we did have a group that went and shot the Galapagos and shot a lot of wild animal life. And plates that we can put into the scenes that we shot in Australia, so that the animals will be there, the backgrounds will be there, the environment will seamlessly evoke what it might have been like to be a kind of pioneer on the Galapagos 90 years ago.
It's curious, because I think that if you were, maybe you have a different answer, but I suspect that if I were to ask you what your biggest achievement is, you wouldn't talk about your film career.
Well, I think the family has been, the biggest achievement. I'm so proud of them, happy to be a part of this family. My, relationship with Cheryl, these are foundational, and I'm proud of the work that I've done as a professional. But family, that's you're playing for keeps when you're talking about your family. And we've had, we've been blessed with a lot of good fortune, and sure challenges along the way. But Cheryl and I have been able to navigate them. Our kids have really risen to the occasion when they needed to, and that's been incredibly meaningful and gratifying.
How did you do it? I mean, with all the films that you made and being away from home for so long, did you literally bring your family with you on some of those long shoots?
Yeah. If we were doing it today, FaceTime would have helped a lot. That didn't exist. And Cheryl wanted to keep us together, and I'm really grateful that she did. And the kids, sometimes I worried about it, but to this day, the kids say that those trips on location meant a lot to them. And yes, they might have been disruptive to what they were doing at school and their friends and so forth, but they had enough time at home that they felt like they were getting the best of both. So I'm grateful that that's the way they felt about it. It always worried me just a little bit, but Cheryl was the glue, and I made it a priority, so that for me, for example, well, like at one point, when music videos became a big thing and directors were doing commercials and music videos in addition to directing, I started to dabble in that a little bit. And Cheryl one day said, I didn't expect you to have a company and be trying to be a mogul, but I get it. And you love Imagine, and you love, what you and Brian can do together there. And I knew you wanted to be a director, and I knew that would be time consuming, but just do me a favor. Don't do extra stuff you don't have to do. Like, don't act. You don't want to be an actor. Don't do music videos. You're not a music video director, and, do your movies, work on the company, and then there's us. Okay. And she meant it. And I heard her, and that's what I've done. So in a way, it looks like I'm a little more frantic now. I wasn't always I wasn't always spinning all of these plates because the family was the thing, other than shooting a movie, which Cheryl always found a way to somehow make it possible for these two things to coexist in a healthy and a constructive way.
When other people talk about you, whether it's Brian Grazer or your daughter or others, your brother, they talk about your humility. And I've met you, and I think it's just so plainly obvious. And sometimes some of those people say, I kind of wish he would just do a victory lap and pump his fist in the air and just look at this body of work. But I wonder whether you not sort of or deciding maybe that you're not going to believe the hype, that maybe other people talk about you, is a protective mechanism to keep you hungry.
I think that's pretty astute. I don't really. I think buying into the hype is a dangerous idea, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished, and I think I'm good at my job, but I think there are a lot of people who are good. I think I've been given a lot of great opportunities, and I do hope that the best is ahead, and in a world where there's so much good work being done. Things like victory laps and stuff are, I don't know, it seems like not only a waste of time, but, a little bit ill-conceived. It's if you love the medium and respect it and you care about audiences and you enjoy the work, just do that. just do that. If you don't, stop, because there are other people that would really like to have those opportunities. That's kind of my simple frame of mind. The other thing was early on, I had read one of my favorite books as a kid, as a teenager, was Frank Capra's autobiography, Name Above the Title, which is pretty apocryphal, I have a feeling. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, a great story, a great book. And in it, he told a story about finally winning the Academy Award for It Happened One Night, and then getting deathly ill. Mm. And no one could diagnose what the problem was, and he was dying. And a Christian Scientist came up and knocked on the door. This is all according to Frank Capra. Knocked on the door, saw his wife, and said, "I'm a Christian Scientist. I don't believe your husband is sick. Would you let me see him?" And so she went upstairs and said, "I think you're terrified. I don't think you're sick. I think you just won an award that was very important to you, and now you don't know how to follow that." And walked away. And he was furious with her. And 3 days later, started to get better and felt like she was right. And so I remember reading that story. When I started to feel that pressure after Splash and Cocoon, and a lot of opportunities were coming my way, and I wanted to live up to this, these opportunities that were coming my way, I went a different tack. And I started to think about Gary Marshall, who was the best boss I ever worked for. He created and for most of the years ran Happy Days. Also a tremendous movie director, Beaches and Pretty Woman and so many really big successes. But his attitude toward a season of television, and I then recognized it was also Andy Griffith's attitude, was that it was a kind of a long haul, but you worked your tail off every week to try to make a great episode. And you just had to know that some of them weren't going to click. And maybe a few really would. But what you were trying to do is just be as strong as you could be and make as good a show as possible every single week. And that was your way of life. And I began to think, I'm going to adopt that for movies. I'm not going to be Stanley Kubrick and wait 5 years between movies. I'm going to make movies. I'm going to work, and I'm going to treat my whole career like it's a season of television. I'm going to give it everything I've got, but I'm going to recognize that there are limits, and I'm going to test those limits as best I can. That's kept me kind of sane and focused, and always looking toward the next idea.
You've roughly made a feature film every 2 years, sometimes every year. And I wonder whether you always feel like, because of the accolades, right? And I mean, Apollo 13, it's the Library of Congress calls it, one of the most culturally relevant films in American history. It's like it's in their their pantheon. Obviously, you won an Academy Award for A Beautiful Mind. So many films that you've made have had such enormous impact. Do you feel now when you make a film, you just want to make a film that you like, or do you also feel like, I don't know, do you get a bit sort of just butterflies or nerves, like you hoping that people will love this film as much as they love your previous ones?
I always feel that. I always feel that. And then there's a point where you recognize kind of how the film is going to land with audiences. I do a lot of test screenings. So long before a movie hits the theaters, I have a pretty good idea of who loves it, who just kind of likes it, who is the type of viewer who's never going to quite get with this. And you still never know until it comes out, because every moment is released, and it reflects, that the zeitgeist at that time. So you still never know. But I do it more for the process, but I really always hope for the best. And I don't want to take on something that I don't think has a chance to be really worthy of people's time. And for whatever reason, I've done different films for different reasons. I mostly did The Grinch because I really wanted to direct Jim Carrey in that kind of demanding physical role. I thought this is a sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity, and he's a comedy genius, and he didn't disappoint me. It was hard work, real challenge, hard on him, hard on all of us, and kind of mixed reviews at the time. Great box office. Now, it's like a movie that people revisit rather over the holidays, and people want to talk to me about the film all the time. I was proud of it then, and I'm proud of it now. But more than anything, I didn't do it because I really wanted to tell that story. I did it because I wanted to be the one to direct Jim Carrey, trying to bring that character, that animated character, to the screen in a live action way. So that's just one example of kind of, what will trigger me. Eden is a project that I bumped into the story on a family vacation 15 years ago. It's a mystery. People still don't quite know what happened, but I read various accounts and pieced together a version and said, well, that would make a pretty fascinating character study and a pretty cool thriller. But I nursed it along for years, and I finally feel only in the last few years that audiences are kind of ready to recognize the themes reflected in this story, be fascinated by these characters, and ready to kind of go on the ride with these characters. So we got to make it. It was a true labor of love project made on an indie budget, but and we'll see what people think of it. We're still editing, but it feels pretty good to me now.
I wonder. I mean, this is sort of my last question for you. I mean, it's a little bit of a cliche to ask, and I'm asked this too, and I don't always know how to answer it, because I look at your body of work and I think, God, what have you not done? I mean, documentaries and different kinds of films. Big sort of blockbuster box office films, and then sort of smaller films, and Star Wars films, and then really deep intellectual films like Frost Nixon. I mean, is there something that you haven't done, that you haven't been able to explore yet, that you still want to do?
Not by category, not by genre, because early on, one of the few things that I did by design was I really wanted to prove to the creative community and to the investment community that I could work in different genres and tones and styles. Unlike my career as an actor, where it was, I was correctly, narrowly typecast, and I didn't want to be typecast as a director. So now I just look at the ideas, the characters, the world, and if it's something that I'm excited about and want to share, then I just want to do it and apply everything that I've learned to that, and apply the resources of Imagine, Brian Grazer's sensibility, a great team that we have, and try to elevate, every project as best I can. So it's a way of life, really, more than anything else. And however, it requires investment. It requires a lot of cooperation. So unlike a painter who needs a canvas, or a writer who can sit down and generate their art, I need cooperation and support. So that's something you have to kind of keep earning too. And I'm aware of that.
Ron Howard, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Great talking to you.
Hey, thanks so much for watching my conversation with actor, director, and producer Ron Howard. His latest work is a documentary about the life and times of Jim Henson. It's now streaming on Disney+. You can find out more about all of Ron's projects by visiting our website, thegreatcreators.com/Howard. And if you want to see more videos like this one, please click the subscribe button. We post a new episode every week. And of course, we are an audio podcast, so please do check us out wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure to click the follow button so you never miss a new episode. We'll see you back here next week. Thanks for watching.